Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Noem. President Trump wanting to break the Chinese Communist Party's dominance over the critical minerals needed to power our everyday lives in America. He holds a call with CCP leader Xi Jinping as a big summit in Washington today could be a major step forward in shaking the Chinese regime. The Trump administration is unveiling its biggest plan yet to rebuild critical mineral supply chains aimed at countering China's dominance. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is hosting a meeting today with officials from several dozen countries. The man who attempted to assassinate President Trump on a Florida golf course during his candidacy in 2024 gets a life sentence today. We'll hear comments from his court-appointed attorney. DHS Secretary Noem visits a segment of the southern border to highlight how much the Trump administration has achieved over the past year. Latest figures on border encounters, apprehensions, fentanyl deaths, and missing children. The FBI seizes 1,000 samples from an illegal CCP-linked biolab in Las Vegas. We talked to a senior Epoch Times reporter who has covered this issue in detail. Ukraine says military issues taking center stage as U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian envoys meet in Abu Dhabi amid fresh strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. The Trump administration racing to break the Chinese regime party's dominance over the critical minerals needed to power our everyday lives in America. President Trump holds a call with CCP leader Xi Jinping this morning as a big summit in Washington today could be a major step forward in shaking the Chinese regime. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu, who has more on this story from the White House. Mari, good afternoon.
Don, good afternoon. And that's right. And President Trump today provided a readout of that call with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, calling the call long and thorough and saying that they discussed a wide-ranging number of topics, including Iran, the Russia-Ukraine war, trade, military, and the president's upcoming visit to China in April. President Trump also says that the CCP leader would consider raising its soybean purchases to 20 million metric tons this current season, up from 12 million tons in that next season. He said that he would purchase up to 25 million tons of soybeans. And this call is taking place the same day that Washington hosts a new global summit aimed at weakening China's monopoly on the critical mineral market. Here's Vice President Vance talking at that summit earlier today. Take a look.
Every single one of us represented in this room has become dependent on arrangements we did not choose, and right now, arrangements that we cannot control. We all face the same vulnerability: access to the things that protect our people and sustain our way of life. Everything from missile defense systems to energy infrastructure to advanced manufacturing to emerging technologies. The fundamental supply chains that support these industries sometimes can vanish in the blink of an eye without any control or influence from many of the countries in this room.
China has got a stranglehold. They can control anywhere between 85 to 100% of the top 20 critical minerals. This is a threat not just to the U.S. but to the whole world, and that's why, again, convening with a number of cabinet secretaries, Vice President Vance, Marco Rubio, Howard Lutnick, Chris Wright, myself, across the whole of government, saying that all of these countries, let's come together.
Representatives from more than 55 countries joined in this critical minerals summit this morning, and half of them expressed or planned interest in joining a, quote, preferential trade zone that would establish price floors for critical minerals. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this morning that the goal of this price floor was to create the kind of disruption that comes with a market monopoly, or that monopoly being used as leverage against other countries. And this is coming just 2 days after President Trump signed an executive order unveiling a $12 billion critical mineral stockpile called Project Vault. Take a look.
American businesses have risked running out of critical minerals during market disruptions. Today we're launching what will be known as Project Vault to ensure that American businesses and workers are never harmed by any shortage. We don't want to ever go through what we went through a year ago. Just as we, although it did work out, thank you. Just as we have long had a strategic petroleum reserve and a stockpile of critical minerals for national defense. We're now creating this reserve for American industry so we don't have any problems.
Project Vault combines a $10 billion in export-import bank financing and $2 billion in private sector financing. And the president says that he expects taxpayers to make a profit from the interest on the loan that was used to start the initiative. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. Ryan Routh, the man convicted of attempting to assassinate then presidential candidate Donald Trump in 2024, was sentenced to life in prison today. His court-appointed attorney said he disagreed with the judge's reasoning.
She's the judge. She's well within her prerogative to express her opinions. And the question of the defendant's character is pertinent in her calculation of what an appropriate sentence would be. So I don't want to criticize the fact that she drew her own conclusions. I just disagree with them.
Federal Judge Eileen Canyon in Florida handed down the sentence plus a mandatory additional 7 years for a firearms offense. Prosecutors had asked for the life sentence, stating in court filings that Routh has not shown any remorse and calling the assassination attempt heinous. Routh's court-appointed attorney for the sentencing had argued a 27-year sentence would be punishment enough for the failed plot to kill Trump, a crime he said hurt no one. The sentence comes 4 months after a jury convicted Routh for several offenses, including the assassination attempt, assaulting a federal officer, and several arms offenses. His attorney said he would appeal the sentencing decision. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem is visiting a segment of the border in Arizona today to thank all federal, state, and local law enforcement. She also thanks President Trump for prioritizing border security during his first year back in the White House.
Overall, Customs and Border Protection has recorded the lowest number of encounters in the agency's history in 2025. Daily encounters have fallen by 95% over the last year. While the daily average of apprehensions in the Biden years was over 5,100 per day, in the last year it was less than 250. In addition to keeping the illegal aliens out, we're also protecting the American people from the deadly drugs that are coming in. And just in 2025, CBP seized over 600,000 pounds of illicit drugs. The death rate and the fentanyl deaths in this country have dropped in 1 year under President Trump. Because he secured the border, fentanyl deaths have gone down 30%.
The secretary said the flow of fentanyl over the southern border has dropped by 56% since Trump took office. The administration also located 145,000 unaccompanied illegal immigrants' children who entered under President Biden and later became unaccounted for. Noem said the Trump administration will not stop until it finds every single one of them. She added that for the last 9 months, Border Patrol has released 0 illegal immigrants into the interior of the country. And crime rate in the U.S. has been at its lowest under Trump. The Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, Rodney Scott, was also present.
We've just begun. We've got a lot to go. We've got a lot to do, but we're building border wall at an unprecedented pace, as the chief mentioned. We're rolling out technology. And most of all, we're hiring more Border Patrol agents and more officers to make sure that we provide America the border security that they deserve.
Border Czar Tom Homan said today federal agencies made significant progress working with state and local officials in Minneapolis. Homan said the improvements in cooperation have enabled a drawdown of 700 officers effective today.
We currently have an unprecedented number of counties communicating with us now and allowing ICE to take custody of illegal aliens before they hit the streets. Unprecedented cooperation. And I'll say it again. This is efficient, requires only 1 or 2 officers to assume custody of a criminal alien target rather than 8 or 10 officers going into the community and arresting that public safety threat. This frees up more officers to arrest or remove criminal aliens. More officers taking custody of criminal aliens directly from the jails means less officers on the street doing criminal operations. This is smart law enforcement, not less law enforcement. It's safer for the community, safer for the officers, and safer for the alien. Given this increase in unprecedented collaboration, and as a result of the need for less law enforcement officers to do this work in a safer environment, I have announced effective immediately, we will draw down 700 people effective today. 700 law enforcement personnel. We have also fully integrated CBP personnel into the ICE ERO team structure under one unified chain of command. Not two chains of command. I want to be clear. Just because you prioritize public safety threats don't mean we forget about everybody else. We will continue to enforce the immigration laws in this country.
Homan also dispelled rumors about ICE asking jails to hold people past their release date. And he gave updates on body cameras for federal agents. The borders are also addressed reports of checkpoints being set up by anti-ICE activists. Homan praised agents for putting up with the hatred and violent rhetoric they face.
During our efforts to identify and implement improvements of how operations are planned, conducted, and managed, we identified a gap in regard to the use of body-worn cameras. And this was actually raised by the workforce when I started walking around talking to people here. Some officers and agents had them, some didn't. That inconsistency was unacceptable, so we moved immediately to prioritize full body cam deployment in the city. I discussed this with Secretary Noem a couple of days ago, and she made the decision to deploy them. The plan is to deploy them nationwide, but it's a priority for the city right now. We want to be fully transparent in what we do. The American people seek and deserve professional and trustworthy law enforcement, and I and the President expect that any misconduct will not be tolerated and will be swiftly addressed. And it's shameful and incomprehensible to me that this unlawful and threatening behavior is being tolerated by anyone. As far as what I saw yesterday with the roadblocks being set up, you're not going to stop ICE. You're not going to stop Border Patrol. The only thing you're doing is irritating your community and want to go get groceries or pick their children up or whatever. I talked to the chief of police, and he committed to taking swift action on those illegal roadblocks. They're illegal. We shouldn't tolerate them. Again, a complete drawdown is going to depend on the cooperation, continued cooperation of local and state law enforcement, and the decrease of the violence, the rhetoric, and the attacks against ICE and Border Patrol. The federal law enforcement personnel, ICE and CBP, and other partner agencies are patriots. And they've carried out their duties patriotically, with integrity, with professionalism, and compassion.
Homan said the administration's goal in Minneapolis is ultimately a complete drawdown, but he said that's contingent on cooperation and stopping the violence against ICE and Border Patrol agents. The Border Czar said no one's done border security better than President Trump. Homan mentioned that he worked for 6 presidents and 10 administrations when it comes to public safety and border security. He said the current success is unprecedented. Homan detailed some figures from the surge. He said federal agents have arrested 14 criminal illegal immigrants who had homicide convictions, 87 with sex offenses, 139 with assault convictions, and 28 gang members. The Senate is taking up alleged Somali fraud schemes. A subcommittee chaired by Ted Cruz is holding a hearing at this hour. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting me to testify as chairs the Fraud Prevention and Oversight Committee in the House. I've been working tirelessly over the past year to expose the massive fraud that Tim Walz and his administration has enabled. We've also proposed solutions and worked to hold state agencies and criminals accountable. We have a long way to go, but we are getting results. With my brief remarks, I want to highlight 3 things: how this started, where the money is going, and provide a roadmap for how states can prevent fraud and we can partner better with the federal government. First, how it started. The original fraud scandal was tied to the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP, which is a federal program for low-income families with children. There had been allegations of fraud in this program since 2011. By 2014 and 15, there were raids, charges, and convictions of child care providers for billing non-existent or absent children, with fraud exceeding $1 million in some cases. In March and April of 2019, just a few months into the Walz administration, The Legislative Office Auditor published 2 reports about the CCAP fraud. They outlined the fraudulent providers and the alleged movement of millions of dollars in cash out of our state to Somalia, with allegations that the money was going to fund terrorism. Unfortunately, according to multiple whistleblowers, soon after these reports were released, the Criminal Investigation Unit for Child Care Fraud, which had been leading the charge on these prosecutions, was shut down by the Department of Human Services. Rather than conducting criminal investigations of fraud, the Walz administration essentially renamed fraud as overpayment, and they referred any overpayment cases to a new internal overpayment committee, which would decide if they should pursue reimbursement. The DHS staff in this unit were no longer allowed to talk to their counterparts in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension without prior supervisor approval. Failure to address child care fraud and the decision to stop criminal investigations led directly to the largest COVID fraud scandal in the nation. In March of 2020, Representative Ilhan Omar authored a bill called the Meals Act, which eventually was incorporated into a larger COVID package. This law enabled states to waive the normal eligibility requirements for participating in the National School Lunch Program, eliminating income requirements, site inspections, and expanded distribution methods. Minnesota took full advantage of these waivers and enabled site sponsors like Feeding Our Future, Partners in Quality Care, and Gargar Family Services to bill for hundreds of millions of fake meals for fake children. Just one of these groups, Feeding Our Future, became the largest COVID fraud in state and national history, bilking taxpayers of at least $250 million. To date, there have been 78 indictments and 61 convictions in the Feeding Our Future scandal, with more cases to go on trial this spring. The Feeding Our Future prosecutions then revealed that as many as half of those defendants were also getting state money in other Medicaid-funded programs. Yet despite reports on this back in 2023, more than 3 years ago, Tim Walz and his agencies didn't stop those defendants from getting additional state money in other Medicaid programs. We now have found fraud in multiple Medicaid programs, including autism centers, sober homes, non-emergency medical transportation, integrated community supports, and housing stabilization services. In December, our committee held a hearing on credible allegations of fraud in 2 new areas, adult day services and assisted living facilities. We now have seen allegations of fraud in 14 Medicaid programs. The former first U.S. attorney who led these prosecutions for years stated that the estimated fraud is $9 billion. And this doesn't count fraud in SNAP or child care programs. So where's the money going? Minnesotans pay their taxes and they expect their money to go to things that help their communities, roads, schools, healthcare, and not to be taken by criminals, to buy resorts in Kenya, apartments in Nairobi, property in Turkey, or luxury homes and cars in the U.S. Worse yet, Minnesota taxpayers have allegedly found their ways into the hands of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab, both directly and indirectly. The money is walking out the door at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Back in 2017...
And you're just watching a hearing on the fraud happening in Minnesota with Senator Cruz saying that there's $9 billion of fraud in the state, and Republican, or rather Democratic lawmakers not focusing on the fraud, but the protests and law enforcement's actions in Minnesota. Joining us to discuss now is Ammon Blair, a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Ammon has over 2 decades of experience as a U.S. Border Patrol agent and U.S. Army officer. So Ammon, thank you for joining us today. So you were listening to this hearing. What were your initial thoughts? The person who just spoke, the witness who just spoke, saying that the guardrails, the system has certain gaps that allowed fraud to happen.
Yeah, once again, thank you for having me. Yeah, look, unfortunately, whenever you have a mass influx of illegal aliens or foreign nationals into the United States, you create a situation where they have allegiance tied to not just the United States or the Constitution, but that's going to be tied to organizations that brought them here, whether that's going to be Al-Shabaab that was mentioned just now in the hearing, to their country itself through remittances, where Somalia is receiving about 25% of their GDP. And so a lot of times when they're sent here to the United States, they don't assimilate, they remain in their communities. And and are beholden to these organizations. And so that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the fraud that we see or witness inside of third world countries, specifically in Somalia, brought here into our own area. That the culture that is rampant in Somalia itself is now brought here as once I said again that they do not assimilate and that they remain in their own communities, and this is all by design. Everything that was said in the hearing just now was to try to diminish or try to subvert the complete rule of law. In fact, I forget which senator it was that stated that ICE conducting immigration enforcement on the streets was breaking the law. And so what we're seeing now is rhetoric, whether that's from Congress, whether that's from Tim Walz or others, that when ICE conducts immigration enforcement, that it's breaking the law, that they are seeking to completely nullify immigration enforcement altogether. They're seeking to completely eradicate the whole idea and concept of a citizen versus an illegal alien. It was just at the Grammy Awards where they talked about how no one is illegal, that we're all on stolen land. And really now that used to be rhetoric that you'd only hear from either the Communist Party or anarchists, but now you're hearing it into the halls of Congress.
So, Border Czar Tom Homan said today that the Trump administration will immediately draw down 700 immigration agents from Minnesota. And he said this has been made possible through unprecedented cooperation. So your thoughts on that? How important is this cooperation for immigration enforcement?
Yeah, first and foremost, the only way that the Trump administration, ICE, and Border Patrol are going to be able to conduct mass deportations, it's going to be through local law enforcement. It's going to have to be through your sheriffs, through their county jails. It's going to have to be through your local municipalities. They know where the hotspots are. They know where the diasporas of illegal aliens typically are in their communities. And so that sharing of information and intelligence is crucial. However, I do want to state that this is a step in the right direction, but the jail enforcement model is actually a very reactive model. They were already apprehended. They were already arrested due to other crimes. And this is simply another step in the way to get a criminal out of the streets of your community, is going through ICE as opposed to allowing them to remain in their community or releasing them. And so I do see this as a step. However, I also see the 700 people or 700 Border Patrol agents that are being taken from Minnesota as also a step backward. We are ceding ground in terms of the state itself, and we are meeting, unfortunately, the demands of anarchists and communists in the streets. When Border Patrol and ICE go into these streets, one, for your audience, this is not an organic movement. This is completely organized and well-funded to completely disrupt and completely dismantle any immigration enforcement whatsoever. And so when that happens, they have a playbook to force ICE and Border Patrol into a dilemma situation, a lose-lose situation. When you're confronted with this, you either have one of two options. You can either cede ground and allow the mob to control or the insurgency to control the area, or you can conduct riot control. You have to try to secure your own personnel, resources. You have to conduct use of force that you wouldn't normally have to. And so either way, it's a lose-lose. One, you show to the nation, you show to these groups that you're ceding control, or the other one, they're going to use it for propaganda, saying that it's an excessive use of force, that it's masked men going after this fascist, it's tyranny from the Trump administration all the way down. And so right now that's what's happening. And unfortunately, by ceding the 700 agents from Minnesota and putting them somewhere else is ceding control and stating, hey, you guys win in this battle.
So you're saying this is ceding control, but Tom Homan called this smarter enforcement, not less. What do you think about that? And do you think other Democratic states could follow in the footsteps of Minnesota? What do you see going forward?
So really the smartest way forward is actually the Florida model. If you look at Florida's model, they have a state immigration division or a Bureau of Immigration. It's completely organized, tasked down. Every state agency, every county sheriff, every municipality, everyone is involved in terms of immigration enforcement. And that is because they realize that immigration enforcement cannot be separated from the level of criminality within their area. And so that's why every single agency, to include their state guard, to include their Department of Agriculture, all are in one, sharing information and sharing also tactics and operations. Really, each state should be that way. And so you shouldn't see control. Now, I do agree that if he allocates the rest of those agents to the United States and does not conduct operations by going from sanctuary city to sanctuary city to sanctuary city, because all that is doing right now is confronting the insurgents in front of them. And we know, unfortunately, we lost this narrative battle in Minneapolis. And so if he does take the agents, either takes them and puts them back at the border or distributes them and creates a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency plan nationwide where you work with local law enforcement first and then holding red counties and red states accountable so that they're also not sanctuary by omissions, then I think that would be great.
Okay, what do you make of the fact that federal agents in the field in Minneapolis will now be required to wear body cameras? What's your view on that?
Yeah, great question. So we were given body cameras almost 3 years ago at our southern border. Look, it's also for the protection of our federal law enforcement. When you're in the thick of it, when you have a mob surrounding you, when you have whistles, when you have smoke, when you have all these things that they are seeking to completely disrupt you and your operations with, it's very difficult to get the camera footage from the inside to show all of it. You're going to get all these citizen journalists. You're going to get these citizens that are making videos from their own cell phones that are surrounding it, but you're not going to get it from the eyes of those that are currently involved. So I think this is great. I think it's a great step. In fact, I think it's great to show our perspective on when we're trying to conduct immigration enforcement operations on your streets, what we are really seeing. And that is a complete insurgency to completely disrupt the operations.
Okay, Ammon, final question here. I'm thinking if you have any concerns over privacy. You know, there's significant support for body cams, but we've been seeing growing concerns about surveillance technology and how it could open the door to an invasion of privacy, for example, or a surveillance state. So let me just ask you for your comments on this issue. How has law enforcement addressed these concerns over the years?
Really, this is just for protection on them. And for the Border Patrol cameras, there's a button on there that you push. If you're about to go into a situation, you just press the button and then it records what's actually happening. And what's funny that you ask that question is because right now you have ICE Watch websites propping up. You have congressmen and women elected officials that are actually currently on ICE Watch programs, completely trying to dox our citizens. Dox our ICE agents and also Border Patrol agents. And then you have citizens that are worried that if they put a camera on, that they're going to have a civil rights issue. Really, what they're worried about is that they're going to finally see, the courts are going to finally see, and America's going to finally see of what these citizens truly are, and that's an insurgency. This is a complete revolutionary effort to completely thwart citizenship. And the people that are at the front line of this, that are standing guard in protecting the boundaries of American citizenship, are our ICE and Border Patrol. So I 100% agree with having the body cameras on. I do not think it's a civil rights violation for all the citizens around, as all they're conducting is immigration enforcement.
Okay, Ammon, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
More fallout after the FBI seized 2020 election-related documents from Fulton County elections offices in Georgia. Fulton County officials today are asking for the return of the documents. They asked the federal courts to order the FBI to return ballots and other documents seized last week. The FBI drove away hundreds of boxes of documents. They're believed to include ballots, tabulator tapes, electronic ballot images, and voter rolls. County Chairman Rob Pitts said today, quote, "This case is not only about Fulton County. It's about elections across Georgia and across the nation. What they're doing with the ballots that they have now, we don't know, but if they're counted fairly and honestly, the results will be the same." The county is also asking the courts to unseal the sworn statement from a law enforcement agent that was presented to the judge who approved the search warrant. The Justice Department declined to comment on the county's motion. There's a sharpened focus on critical minerals in Washington this week. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted more than 50 countries in Washington, D.C. The goal is to band together and weaken China's grip on critical minerals. House lawmakers are also addressing the concern with a vote later today. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the report.
The Trump administration is racing to lessen global dependence on China for critical minerals. These minerals are used to make everyday products, especially high-tech and EV products. Right now, the U.S. relies on China for nearly 90% of minerals.
And then once they control that industry, and they're the only ones in the world that do it, then they can charge you anything they want, but they can also use it against you as leverage, or it can be disrupted if there's any sort of global disruption.
The national security concerns became more evident last year when Beijing imposed export controls on rare earths, causing productions delays and shutdowns for auto manufacturers in America and Europe.
We want to eliminate that problem of people flooding into our markets with cheap critical minerals to undercut our domestic manufacturers. The people who undercut them then jack up the price to a completely unfair level.
The vice president announced at today's critical minerals meeting that the U.S. will establish a price floor system for critical minerals. He and the Secretary of State today welcomed more than 50 nations to the meeting, including South Korea, Japan, and Germany.
As geopolitical risks continue to rise, we will redouble our efforts to secure alternative supply sources.
The nations are banding together to kickstart an international push to diversify critical mineral supply chains. Several countries have signed on to a trading bloc put forth by the White House.
Is an opportunity at self-reliance, that we never have to rely on anybody else except for each other for the critical minerals necessary to sustain our industries and to sustain growth.
Today's meeting comes after President Trump earlier this week signed an executive order to create a new strategic private sector critical mineral stockpile.
We even expect the American taxpayer to make a profit from the interest on the loan used to start the Project Vault.
Project Vault already has buy-in from some of the biggest U.S. companies like General Motors, Boeing, and Google. The executive action is followed by a vote later today in Congress. House lawmakers will vote on the Critical Mineral Dominance Act. It aims to speed up and expand mineral production on federal lands through efforts like making public lands easier to access for exploration and mining. Critics have expressed environmental concerns of expediting mining, though many Democrats have also acknowledged the economic and national security issues at stake. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
To discuss this further, we're joined by Kelly Sloan, energy policy consultant and columnist, and Grant Newsham, retired U.S. Marine colonel and former U.S. diplomat. He's also senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Okay, thank you both for joining us today. So the U.S. has opened a preferential trade zone for these minerals. What are your initial reactions to this initiative? Grant, we'll start with you.
Well, it's about time. One thing to consider here is just the effect that China using their chokehold on critical minerals, rare earths, has had on us. When President Trump took office, he went all out going after the Chinese. Remember, it was about a 140% tariff he put on them. He was going to hit them for fentanyl. And then suddenly, for the first time, they played the rare earth card. And that stopped Mr. Trump in his tracks, forced him to back off. That's how serious this is. So it's, as I said, it's about time, and I'm glad to see it.
So Kelly, Grant says it's about time. What are your reactions?
Well, I agree with Colonel Newsham. It's hard to overstate the importance of these minerals to not only our economy, to our national security, to our energy infrastructure. And I believe this is the right way to do that, to work with our allies and to form these trade blocs to be able to secure those the supply chains and try and wrest some of that control away from China. China right now has as the Colonel said, has a lock on particularly the refining of these minerals. About 86% of the market is owned by China right now for most of these minerals. That's up from 82% in 2020. Now, will this draw that back a whole lot? Probably not, but at least it gives us some options. Not let us be quite as dependent on the whims of communist China, who have shown themselves to be not reluctant at all to use their chokehold on this industry as a weapon.
And Colonel, can I just ask you, what do we know so far about this preferential trade zone, and how will it actually help the countries who join?
Well, it's the early stages, of course, and you have to see how it plays out. But there is a real interest in it, as you can see by the number of participants and the fact that the Vice President and the Secretary of State were there to kick it off, and the President obviously understands this. What it does is it prevents the, potentially, if it goes to fruition, it prevents the Chinese from using this pricing power, really their dominance of the critical minerals, particularly rare earth end of it, as a weapon, really to bring their enemies into line, and if necessary, to destroy their industries and have that kind of threat over them. So if you get into the new consortium that is being talked about, well, you in theory, you make it almost impossible or very hard for the Chinese to extort you. And anytime you can get away from really potentially fatal blackmail, well, that's a good thing. Obviously, guaranteeing prices, guaranteeing demand, easing up on permits, and which should make it easier to have processing facilities somewhere besides China. These are all good things, and they're all actually commonsensical. I think any businessman could tell you, well, yeah, these are the things you have to do. And it is almost impossible to compete. In fact, it is impossible to compete with a regime like the PRC that doesn't play by any normal economic or investment rules.
Right. So speaking of which, Kelly, officials did not actually mention China by name, but much was said about the threat made by the Chinese regime to limit the world supply of critical minerals last year. So can you just remind us, for our viewers, everyone watching here, what is at stake when supplies are restricted and the impact of that?
Well, I think you saw it in the report just previous year, what happened when China put in export controls over even just a few of these minerals, what it did to our auto industry. Now, you think of what these minerals are used for, and it's not just energy, but in terms of batteries, as we try and electrify our economy, and as AI, as it becomes a growing industry, is going to use up a lot of electricity, and we're looking at ways to increase our storage with battery technology and whatnot. All of that requires critical minerals and rare earths. The national security implications that these minerals are components of some of the most high-end chips that were used in just about anything from personal vehicles to jet fighters to missile systems. They're found in just about anything. And if you have one government, especially an adversarial government like Communist China, that has a chokehold over supply and therefore the pricing, like the Colonel said, you can see how that can be used as a weapon. Right now, perhaps it's an economic one. Later on, if for instance, China does make good on its threat to make a move on Taiwan and decides to cut off Western supply of those critical minerals, our ability to ramp up our defenses and our defense industry will be severely hampered. Not to mention the impacts it's going to have on the domestic side of the economy as well. So, like I said before, it's difficult to understate the importance of these minerals. And I, as a bit of a free market purist myself, I do think that this is one of those unique instances where the stakes are so high for not just our national security, but for the security of the entire West, that it requires some government intervention. This is a good way to do it, working with our allies, forming trade blocs, securing that those supply chains. I think it's a far better approach, quite frankly, than what he was doing with some of the rare minerals by trying to buy into U.S. companies and have the government own stakes in U.S. companies. Doing it this way is, I think, going to have be a lot more sustainable going forward, have a better economic result for us. If you couple that with the bill that the Congress is contemplating right now to allow some of the streamlining of the permitting so we can mine more of our own, I think the administration in this case is going certainly in the right direction.
Right. So, Colonel, Kelly brought up that these minerals go into some of the everyday items that we use. Can you just add to what Kelly said, the stakes here, and how does this, how important is this to the U.S. military as well?
Well, you use it in just about everything, from smartphones to medical equipment to F-35s to chips that are in everything. Unless you want to go back to making things maybe out of wood and iron, you'd better pay attention to what's going on here. And how does it affect the military? If you want cruise missiles for attack or missile defense systems, F-35s, you want certain types of radars, you want night vision devices, you want drones. All of these depend on rare earths and also the other less rare but equally critical minerals. You cannot have a modern military without access to these. And it really tells you something that we have gotten ourselves into this fix over 30 years. And if you could name one admiral, one general who was raising merry hell about getting this dependent on the Chinese, I'd like to know his name. So President Trump is dealing with a problem that has festered for decades, and now he's the one who's supposed to fix it. It's to their credit that within a year they are going after this as aggressively as they are. But you really cannot overstate the importance of these materials, minerals, from a defense perspective alone.
Okay, Kelly, I'm wondering here if there's a role for the private sector as well to reduce reliance on China. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And again, if Congress does pass the bill to allow some streamlining of the permitting for domestic mining, certainly we have a lot of these minerals domestically at our disposal. A lot of them are located on federal lands, which creates some problems when we have such a strict and cumbersome permitting process and environmental reviews. One of the reasons that China is so dominant in this industry is because they don't have the restraints we do. Under their centrally planned economy, all that matters is the result that some bureaucrat wrote down 5 years ago. Whether they're polluting their waters or causing other issues, that doesn't really matter to them. We go too far the other way, where we've made it almost impossible to responsibly use our own resources that we have under our feet here. So I think unleashing the power of the free market within our country will go a long ways to stripping us of some of that dependence on China. And we can't do it all on our own. We do have to rely on allies. We have there's more of these minerals in Canada and Australia and some other places. So working with our allies and forming a trade bloc like this, again, I think is a wonderful idea. And the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit for going down this road.
Okay, Colonel, what do you think about what Kelly said? I'll give you the final word here.
Well, he's absolutely right. One thing I would add is that it is going to take the government to sort of take the wood to the Chinese, because anytime that they have the ability to undercut by pricing somebody who tries to set up as competition and drive them out of business, they're going to do it. And that cannot be allowed to continue. You have to have the same rules. You have got to go after that and make it so they cannot undercut, either by pricing or even in direct investment into, say, a startup in a free nation, including the United States. So they are going to have to sort of not just block and unleash the U.S. private sector, which will, once they have can play by the same rules as everyone else, we will win. But you have got to take on the Chinese. They've been allowed to cheat, and people act like this is normal. It's not. It's not a normal society, not a normal economy. And we've got to actually recognize that, and the government has to do that. Unfortunately, China has bought off any number of lobbyists and politicians, but as Peter Schweitzer writes about all the time. But that said, we know what the problem is, and once American factories start closing because of the Chinese cutting off rare earths, well, then all sides of the political spectrum will take an interest.
Right, Colonel, you're absolutely right that it's way past time that we take on the Chinese. Thank you both for speaking with us today. Kelly, Colonel Newsroom.
Thank you.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is testifying before the House Financial Services Committee, saying the Trump administration aims to cut regulations on small banks to make it easier for home buyers and small businesses to get loans. He's also touting Trump's policies, like deregulation and the $1,000 savings account for newborns.
How will these Trump accounts impact this new generation of Americans' view of financial independence versus socialism?
Again, history would show that people who own a piece of the action do not want to bring down the system when you are part of the system. As I said, 38% of Americans, American households, they do not participate in the equity market. Many do, many directly, many through 401ks. But over time, the goal here should be to have everyone own a piece of the American economic engine. We at Treasury, working with many people, are going to work on financial literacy. This will be one of the greatest real-time experiments in history. You are bringing Wall Street to Main Street, and Wall Street will work for Main Street instead of the other way around. Under the regulatory straitjacket that emerged that pushed lending outside the traditional banking system, small banks became too small to succeed. And I think we have to fix that and tailor it to the risk for people who know their communities, who are concentrated geographically. And if you were in Iowa, you are concentrated in farming. If you were in Florida, you are likely concentrated in real estate and tourism, and we need to make adjustments.
Secretary Bessent, at the end of last year, President Trump signed into law the NDAA, which included my legislation, which will be overseen by the Treasury Department, the Comprehensive Outbound Investment National Security Act, also known as the Fight China Act. The COINS Act will ensure that Americans are not unknowingly funding the military-industrial complex of our adversaries by codifying and enhancing the Trump administration's existing outbound investment security program. Can you discuss the Treasury Department's new obligations under this bill, and how do you intend to implement it to prevent capital flows into Chinese military-industrial complex companies?
Well, I want to thank you for this important piece of legislation. It is another arrow in our quiver, and I can tell you, as I am the lead negotiator with China on the economic front, it is very useful for me to be able to say, well, I'm happy to refer things to the Hill.
Bessent says increasing the lending power and cutting red tape on small banks is vital, as they are the main source of lending to the middle class. And more than 55% of these community banks have disappeared since the 2008 financial crisis. He detailed this in his annual report for the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which he is presenting to both chambers of Congress this week. One point of contention in today's hearing were tariffs. Bessent says the price hikes is a one-time fee, not adding to inflation, and they're already contributing to more industry in rural America.
Are tariffs inflationary, yes or no?
According to the San Francisco Federal Reserve, with 150 years of data,
yes or no?
Tariffs do not cause inflation.
One clear reason that the housing crisis has grown worse is that you and the rest of the Trump administration levied tariffs on housing production goods like lumber and steel, as well as appliances. These tariffs will result in half.
Lumber is
reclaiming my time. You don't get to talk.
Lumber is at a 5-year low, Congresswoman.
Reclaiming my time.
Let's just have the facts.
Reclaiming my time.
I believe the ranking member does not understand the definition of generalized inflation versus one-time price increases. I would also note that housing, especially for working Americans, a Wharton study has shown that the mass unfettered immigration, adding 10 to 20 million new people demanding housing, Congresswoman, is what caused a great deal of housing inflation for working Americans. We were with the CEO of John Deere, and he is building a new factory in Indiana, and he's building one in Indiana, one in North Carolina, and the president said, what made you do that? And he said, the tariffs.
The tariffs. Yeah, no, this really is putting manufacturing in a position to compete with China, whether it's a CNC shop, whether it's the medical device industry. There's obviously some pieces there with regulatory environment, things like that, but it's really giving manufacturing a spot.
The FBI raided a suspected China-linked biolab in Las Vegas over the weekend. Authorities say they seized over 1,000 samples from the lab for testing. Joining us to discuss is Joshua Phillips, senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times and host of Crossroads on Epoch TV. So Josh, always great to have you on the show here. Now, investigators are saying the makeshift lab in Las Vegas has links to the Reedley Biolab, found in California in 2023, which you've reported on. So can you tell us more about this? What is the situation?
Yeah, so a biolab tied to a Chinese national was found in both Reedley, California, which is a nice little farming town, and also in a place in Las Vegas. The individual who is, being accused with this, he was with the lab in Reedley, California. This is what is it, Jai Bei Ju, and basically, he's wanted. He's a wanted fugitive from Canada. He was caught doing IP theft, intellectual property theft in Canada. Came to the U.S. and he was running what he's being accused of. He's awaiting trial, basically in California still. But the allegation is they were making counterfeit COVID-19 test kits and selling them on like the internet. It was a very strange case. Authorities went in the California one. People might have heard there was a story that they had found Ebola in a Chinese biolab in California. The reality of it is they never actually tested any of the vials. There were refrigerators with unlabeled or unknown substances. Some of them had Chinese names, some of them had code names. There were pieces of paper with it was assumed, basically went with them. The CDC never tested any of the vials. Local officials called, nothing ever happened with it. And everything was destroyed. We never got answers on what was going on there. We never got answers on whether there was Ebola or not because they destroyed everything. We never found out basically anything. What is known, they had live COVID-19, live tuberculosis, live HIV, live handful of other diseases. They also had over 1,000 humanized mice they were doing experiments on, part of the process of making these counterfeit COVID test kits. The individual charged with that is part of the same company that's apparently tied in with this laboratory they just found in Vegas. He claims that he's already since stepped down from that, but we're awaiting information still. We don't really know what the heck is going on with this.
Okay, so Josh, what is the concern here? You mentioned live viruses and diseases in these makeshift biolabs. Is the concern that these pathogens, viruses, could be released accidentally or on purpose?
That's a real concern because, and this is how it was explained to me by several people I interviewed. Okay, concern number one, in the United States, there are really not any strong regulations against doing this. And that was a big concern the Reedley lab raised. I spoke to several local officials about this. Basically, in the United States, if you want to start up a virus testing lab, it's not that difficult. You can register it. You can buy humanized mice. They're only about $7 each. They're not even expensive. You can buy live viruses and you can experiment with it. The laboratory they found in California was in the back part of a recycling center that used to be a refrigeration chamber for, a local rail line, like not even a professional complex. The one they found in Vegas, this was apparently in the back of someone's house. Like it's not a it's not an advanced biolab. You know what I mean? Like this was not something that advanced, but who knows what they were doing there. The concern is somebody could mess up. Somebody could make a mistake. Somebody could dispose of something improperly. And maybe you'll infect somebody. Maybe you'll infect yourself experimenting with, different viruses and then go around and who knows what you could cause. You could cause quite a bit of damage. The other concern that was raised to me, though, is how the CCP could use this, because a lot of these individuals tied in with this Reedley lab, Chinese citizens, people tied in with IP theft, intellectual property theft, people tied in with the United Front, just through their associations. The CCP, if they did want to use this, well, you wouldn't have to launch a biological warfare attack on America. You can make it look like an accident in someone's backyard. And that's what a biowarfare attack on America could look like if they do these types of things.
Okay, so on that concern, Congress's Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has raised such concerns of bioweapons research at the Reedley lab. So what do you make of those concerns then?
Well, the hard reality is we'll never get answers on the Reedley lab because everything was destroyed. All the evidence was destroyed. They had to hire a company to come in and basically just eradicate everything. The reason was local officials, and I spoke with them, I interviewed them. They called the CDC, and the CDC hung up the phone on them. In the United States, it's not even illegal to do that type of research. In fact, the individual facing charges, he's not facing charges because of that. He's facing charges because he's accused of selling counterfeit, like COVID test kits. It's that kind of stuff, counterfeiting. It's not related to bioweapons research. We might get answers from the Las Vegas laboratory, though, because we're not given many details yet, but they're, based on the information coming out, authorities, when they raided that lab, they did actually seize the vials. And if they seized the vials, I would imagine there's no way you're going to seize things like that and not test them, if not only for safety. And so we might actually get answers because of the connections to the Las Vegas lab.
Okay, Josh, you said earlier that the CCP somehow could use these biolabs. Is there evidence that shows the CCP is directly involved in these incidents?
Only indirectly. So I did look into that pretty extensively. Went to San Francisco, Chinatown, looked into some of the associations tied in with it. You do have some CCP-tied individuals connected to the lab. You also, through the same network, have what are called the Little Red Schools, which are Chinese Communist Party indoctrination centers, schools for kids, like, young kids, based in Las Vegas. And so you do have CCP connections. In terms of Chinese Communist Party biowarfare projects, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, because what a lot of people would tell you, most countries would say we do not have a biowarfare program, but they all do. And the reason is, what is a biowarfare program? A biowarfare program is virus research. A biowarfare program is gain-of-function research. A biowarfare program looks like what was just found in Las Vegas. Like that is what they actually look like. But they just call it something else, which is virus research or whatever else. Like that is the form that biological weapons research programs take.
So on this issue of biowarfare, potentially, we've seen recent cases of Chinese nationals being charged and convicted of smuggling biological pathogens into the U.S. I'm just wondering here, just finally, is all of this connected in some way?
We don't know. Hopefully we get answers. Without a doubt, it is known this. Individuals tied in with the Chinese Communist Party have established very, very unsafe, very low quality, containing probably very dangerous pathogens in the United States, experimenting with them with humanized mice on presents, meaning that they are developing things that could potentially infect humans. We do know that Chinese nationals tied in, based on what we're hearing, to the CCP, have, in fact, as you mentioned, been smuggling pathogens into the United States, including things that could be agro-terrorism. For example, that one of them was a fungus that could have destroyed a lot of our crops and killed cattle and killed humans, but mostly destroyed our food supply. All of these should raise alarms. All of these really should raise alarms. If it did turn out that the lab in Reedley, California had Ebola, which we never got answers on, but there were packages sealed in such a way to contain such pathogens, and with a label that did say Ebola, it was destroyed. We'll never know, but that is the fact in terms of what was found. That could have very easily been something that could have led to a lot of people dying, and hopefully we get answers on it.
Yeah, still a lot of unanswered questions, but like you said, at the very least, despite this should raise alarms to everyone. Thank you so much, Josh, for speaking with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.